Hi, thanks for tuning in. Anybody who is watching this, this is just my second daily Bitwig live stream. This one's going to be a bit quicker than what we did yesterday. I'm going to be looking at LFO Tool and how to use it as a multi-stage envelope generator in Bitwig to modulate absolutely anything. It can be set up to work like you can set it up in Cubase using MIDI CC, or you can use a kind of clever workaround to make it sort of work by audio rate. So that's what we'll be looking at. I've just got a different drum and bass break in to the one that we were listening to in yesterday's broadcast when I was looking at drum slicing. Not going to be touching that at all. It's just something to have in the background. We're going to load up an instrument. So I really like phase plant. I figure we'll mess with an FM bass. Is that? Okay. There we go. So I'm just going to quickly set up some oscillators. We'll add a sine analog, just set the envelope to, I don't know, we do 10 milliseconds attack and something similar on the release, 15 maybe. Okay, hopefully the levels between the mic and the sound is better today. I tweaked the settings in OBS a bit, so hopefully that's set back to normal. Alright, so we've got one oscillator playing a basic sine wave. The break we've got playing in the background sounds like this. And we're just going to throw a few bass notes in here. Let's just draw in a block, 2 bars, I think, to start with. We'll just get like some, make phase plant monophonic, put it in legato mode, give it some glide on legato notes only, just a healthy amount, but not too much. And let's get a couple of extra analog oscillators in here. Now I could have done this with phase 4, which is a similar sort of phase modulation synthesizer built into Bitwig. It would have probably been quicker actually, because in order to set the modulation amounts here, I'm going to have to kind of assign it to macros to be able to modulate it outside of phase plant. So let's just get a note in to listen to, like a F, E0, something like that. Let's do E up to F. Just crank the velocity up. And drag this guy out. I'm just going to overlap this one a bit, just so it glides up in legato. Drag that out a bit more. Alright, see what happens now when we open up the phase modulation depth here. One thing that's a bit annoying about Bitwig, I'm so used to being able to just hit the space bar at any time in Cubase to resume playback, but you have to deselect a plugin and go back to Bitwig to do that, so I'm honestly better off just using the transport bar on my MIDI controller. Just copy that over for now. And we're going to want to change the octaves of these other modulating sine waves. Let's just do 1 and 2 octaves up. Keep it pretty simple for now. And now we should hear it sounding a bit more like a square wave. Oh, there we go again. And if we modulate oscillator 2 with oscillator 3. And this is phase modulation. A lot of people just refer to this as FM these days though, but if we were to modulate the frequency itself, the pitch, that would be real true FM. It sounds a bit different, a bit more chaotic. You get kind of smoother modulations out of phase modulation. Just dial in a healthy maximum depth there, and then I'm just going to assign macro 1 to control the full depth of that modulation, and we'll call this FM 2 to 1. Oh, didn't type over it. There we go. And do the same with this macro to this depth amount here. We'll call this FM 3 to 2. Alright, cool. Now we've got some targets that we can easily modulate outside of phase plan. We could just do everything that we do in Bitwig pretty much in here, but the difference is that we'd be limited to just kilohertz stuff, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's really good when you start stacking it up, especially in like multipass and snap heap chains, like multiband and parallel chains. You can really squeeze a lot of mileage out of this bundle alone, and using this is really about as close to Bitwig workflow as I ever got in Cubase at all. Anyway, we're just using the oscillators. We're going to set up an LFO tool to do some modulation on this note. So the way it works, I did a video on my channel. It was one of the more recent ones I did, but I haven't put anything up in quite a while till lately, on how to use LFO Tool as a modulation source in Cubase. I think it's the highlighted video on my channel, because it's something that, honestly, I think if I haven't done it myself in a while, but I think if I was to do it now, I would probably have to watch my own video just to remember how to set it all up. It's that convoluted. You have to download a MIDI loopback driver, set up a generic remote using that loopback driver as an input, and then route a MIDI track, route LFO Tool through a MIDI track using that loopback driver via the generic remote to modulate a parameter. And you have to do it all through choosing the parameters through drop-down menus, and it is just so cumbersome that drawing automation is honestly faster. And yeah, in 2022 I just needed a more synth-like solution really for these kind of modulations and adding movement. So Bitwig was really, you know, one of my friends had been recently producing in it, and he came from Ableton and even said that the stuff Bitwig could do was next level, and kind of talked to me a bit about it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I need to try this. And I was already getting to a point with sound design and synthesis type workflows in Cubase where I was just finding it a bit clunky for certain things. So here we are. Anyway, we've got our bass note in there. We can now switch back to the rack. So here's phase plan. Say we want to modulate this. If I click it just once, it becomes the top parameter here, and we just need to add a modulation source. Now I could add one of Bitwig's LFOs to this. I'm going to try and keep this fairly short and sweet tonight because it's already quite late, a bit later than I was expecting to do this. So we could add the LFO to that, and if we went into the LFO and make it unipolar, maybe on a triangle shape, and sync it to half a bar. So, you know, we can do basic modulations like this very easily, and you've got a big list of modulation sources, but what it doesn't have is a really flexible multi-stage envelope generator. The closest thing we've got in Bitwig is a 4-stage, where you've basically got two envelopes that you can kind of shape into fins or whatever, and you can sync it to tempo and it'll loop. but that's as close as it gets as far as Bitwig native modulation sources go. So what if we wanted to add LFO Tool to this? Now, there's a few ways to go about it. My personal favorite is to create a chain, because I've already saved this before, but I'll just kind of walk you through the process of how Bitwig works. You can create chains like this, and we can drop phase plant into the chain. So this is now all one unit essentially. In front of what I also want to do is add a container, instrument layer, I think it's called. Yeah, an instrument layer container here, and drag phase plant into it. Okay, so now phase plant has its own chain within this instrument layer, and the instrument layer is in the chain. So we could call this phase plant plus MSEG or something, and we'll just add a new layer here now, and on this layer we'll put an instance of LFO Tool. Right, so I'm just going to tweak the settings a little bit, make it into like a fin for now, something quite basic, and you can see it's being used on channel 1, which is graph 1, this one, to modulate volume, which is what we want. There's no note retriggering or anything set up here yet, which brings up something kind of interesting, and I've never actually noticed this behavior with LFO Tool until now. Actually, I think something with the way I was setting it up before in Cubase was preventing this from happening, but see if I can get it to replicate this problem now. And I don't think it's a problem, I think it's how it's actually designed. But if I hit MIDI notes, you can see the graph number changes, and it's all the one that's important to us is volume, and it's right there in the octave that we want for this bass. So we essentially need that to stay on 1 no matter what key is triggered. So the first thing we want to do is block any other keys from reaching LFO Tool. What I figured out was that C0 is what triggers number 1 here. So in front of LFO Tool, I'm going to add a note filter, and because I use it for this quite regularly, I've set my default preset to only play the key range of C0. We can just close that up. We don't need it to do anything else. Now when I press different keys in that bass range, this should stay stable on 1. That means that we can use it as just a free running synced LFO without any note retriggering, and any notes being played will not affect which of the graphs is being triggered. With note retriggering, which is something I actually wanted to put a bit of time into researching before I actually got online doing this, we're just going to kind of have to wing it. I've got a couple of ideas of interesting ways to do it, but let's just get this running first. We also need, now if we were using, I believe, it's on note retrigger, put it back on half. Let's put it on a bar. I just want to see if it retriggers on. No, okay, so with the note filter on, it's only receiving C0. So if we turn that off now, you can see it re-triggers on that second note. But this is legato, so we want it to kind of continue modulating through it. Now, one idea I had that might work for this is if in Bitwig I think we can set something to only respond to 1 note. So in this case we would say, okay, we only want it responding to E0. So in front of and I haven't even set this up to do anything yet, but just want to try this because I'm interested to see if this will work. If we put Would it be like a note receiver? Source. No, I don't think. Hold on. Don't know if we can. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right module for what I'm thinking of here. Maybe we can just do it through a modulator. Let me see. We could do. It would have to be on. No. Maybe there is a note. We got in there something note related. Note counter, note sidechain. Yeah, that method I'm going to have to research a bit more. I'll just show you how to get this working and how to use it in envelope mode. For setting it to trigger from certain notes, I'm going to have to do a bit more reading up on that. Anyway, what we now need to do, we've got LFO Tool in there. We've got our note filter preventing it from changing notes. What we now need, and I tend to like to use this as in audio rate, because if you use MIDI CC, you've only got so many steps of MIDI between positions, so it can get a bit steppy at very slow rates. With Bitwig, you can set it up to run audio rate. So how we do that is, there's an interesting tool here called a DC offset device, and it's basically just a basic value that goes from 1 down to -1 through 0. But it's supposed to simulate the phase of a waveform as it goes up and down over the zero crossing. So if you were to modulate this super fast with excuse me, Bitwig has an LFO that can reach up to about 5 kilohertz or something, so it goes right up into the audio range, and you can use that to get enough speed out of this that you can generate waves, and then you could modulate it and probably create some interesting oscillators with it. So that's another thing to explore down the line, but that's not what I'm using it for. I just want this to be sending through. Imagine you're looking at a sine wave, and the very peak of one of the arches of the wave, as it reaches the very peak of its phase, if you froze that in time and sent it as an audio signal, it's just like it's almost like a sample of information or something. It's just a blip basically of sound, and what this is doing is sending the very peak of that phase as if it was audio through. So it's just a value as audio. Now, I'm going to mute this because we don't want to be getting the audio that it creates. It's kind of a weird, super high-pitched noise, like a background buzz, basically. So we'll mute it, and on our main chain or on our instrument layer, let's just do it on the instrument layer, we can add an audio rate modulator. Now this, we just need to set the input to our phase plant chain, and the beauty of this is you can set it to any point in the chain. So if you've got a whole stack of inserts, you can set the input for a side chain or whatever modulator that you're using to be any point in that chain. So you say, I want the output of the EQ before it hits the distortion or the compressor to use as a side chain signal. So that's quite nice. So yeah, we just want the LFO tool out as the input. So now, when I press play, you'll see this static line, which is the signal being fed into it from the DC offset device, turn into like a mirror image. And I'm not sure, I don't know the technical know-how why it comes out mirror image here. And another thing to note is this graph in the background where the red line is showing bipolar. But when we're modulating volume, we can't go down into a negative level of volume. It's just down to zero, basically, or negative infinity, they call it. But so it's unipolar. So you're only going to see it occupying half of this area. It's not going to be a complete mirror image, it's going to be a half mirror image. Why it's flipped 180 degrees, I don't know, but the modulation comes out in the shape that we draw here. So yeah, it's a bit strange that, but if somebody knows, an explanation would be great in the comments. So what we'll do is, if I just press play, you'll see the modulation shape occurring here. But here you can see as the curve is rising, it's modulating the volume up from 0 to 100. So now all we need to do, and you can also see the shape within this little graph of this modulation source too. Okay, so we've got that synced to a bar. Let's maybe speed it up just a little bit. We could do like half dotted or something. And now we can just assign that to our FM depth here. Let's open up Phase Plant again and just tap on the other macro, and we can modulate it with, maybe modulate it with a different one. So what we'll do now is we'll just duplicate this note filter layer, and I'm just going to call it MSEG. Call this MSEG. So the note filter is only there to block any key but C0 from being fed into LFO Tool, because C0 is what keeps the volume modulation on graph 1. The DC offset is just feeding the static line of basically audio signal into LFO Tool, so to give it something to shape. And then that shape is being fed into the audio rate modulator, which is then using that shape to modulate anything in your entire project. So let's duplicate this now. So now we've got another one of these. Let's give it a different shape. I don't know, something a bit random maybe. And we need another audio rate mod. And this one, we'll just set the input to the second one of those LFO tools in the chain, which will be the second MSEG down, this one. Okay, so it's all set up exactly like the other one. We don't need note retrigger on either of these. In fact, turn it off of this one as well if it's on. Yep. I'll figure out the note retriggering. I mean, another thing that I read somewhere, which I thought was quite a clever suggestion for that, was there's a device that will make that'll only feed through MIDI notes of a certain velocity or something, and you can set it to only send through notes of 0 velocity, so they make no sound, but they actually trigger the LFO. So that's another. If I can't do it by making a specific note trigger it, I'll try and use velocity. So either way, I'll have a way of just drawing in a note where I want to trigger the LFO. Anyway, that's a task, something to learn another day. Alright, so this second one we can now use to modulate this and see what we end up with. I think we need to slow the LFO down a bit. Yeah, maybe do a bar. And you see, it's a bit weird because it isn't note retriggering, and we've got it on a dotted thing, so the modulation is not happening the same every time this triggers, because this is very linear and happening at the beginning of every bar, and the quarter dotted is obviously going to be kind of jumping, occurring in random sort of places. So I might actually change the speed on this one, quarter, see what we get. And now we've got our modulators working, we can dial in the depth and the starting point of these macros. Better off doing that down here, actually. Once you've assigned a modulator, you can just adjust the depth here. But where this gets really cool is we can add chains of effects into phase plant here. So if we wanted to add multi-band effects, maybe just a two band one, and only distort the highs and mids with decapitator, we can do that. Don't know how good this will sound, but we'll see. So yeah, very versatile like that, and then you can change where the crossover is here. And another clever thing, because one thing that was bugging me was that you've got multi-band effects units here, but no way to solo bands, and I was thinking, well, why not just add button, which you bring the volume down and call it, I don't know, solo 1 up here. So that's the thing, like if you can think of it in Bitwig, you can probably do it. It's that modular, and the tools are there to really kind of add what you want to it, what you need to it, use it for what you need. It's really quite well thought out. I'm quite impressed. So yeah, now that we've got those, we can just hit these buttons and it'll solo the lows or the highs. And it should, if we adjusted the volume of one of them, it should return it back to exactly where it was. Yeah. And I was kicking myself after that. After I figured that out, I was like, of course, it's so simple. But you just kind of have to think outside the box a little bit with Bitwig. It's a bit different in that it gives you all the tools that you need to really achieve anything when it comes to sound design. You just have to put a bit of thought into how to implement it sometimes. Most of the time it's really well thought out, but whoever's idea it was to create a chain, I can't remember where I read it, on some forum post somewhere, someone was saying that, and I was surprised I couldn't find a video on this really. But whoever thought to think of feeding just a static value from a DC offset into LFO Tool and then feeding that into an audio rate modulator, that's just That's just thinking outside the box right there, and I'm quite, I'm quite impressed. Not just with Bitwig, but with whoever thought that up. It's pretty cool. But that goes for doubly now with the grid and the note grid. It's like if you can think of a way to generate notes, you could use it to create chord and scale type features like Cubase has. You can use it to create our crazy arpeggiators that can be modulated so that the groove and the melody changes. And yeah, it's absolutely wild how deep this goes. Today I really just wanted to talk about LFO Tool. I think we can also, if I was to set up just another one of these, let me just delete layer 4, just duplicate this again. Now this one, we're not going to need the DC offset or that. So I think another way to handle this is if we go into the LFO tool, and on this one, if we, I don't know, choose, just give it something really basic like that. Yeah, that'll do. If we wanted, I lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, if we wanted to modulate it by MIDI CC, I think we just need to like choose a MIDI CC channel. I think we put 1 here, and we could use a MIDI modulator, set that to, it's on CC1, I believe that's it, and then we can just take that and modulate something. Let's try modulating the drive on Decapitator with it, see if that works. No, that's not receiving MIDI CC. Why is that? Ah, interesting. So it looks like you can set it to respond to specific channels. Okay, there it is. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure on the MIDI CC method, but I honestly prefer this audio rate method anyway, because you can get much smoother modulations. If I was to slow that first one way down, let's turn this one off for a sec. Which one is that? It's this guy, yep. Not the best sample to really hear it on, but the modulation curve sounds a lot smoother to me than when I've used this in Cubase with MIDI CC. So yeah, I don't know, I might just be imagining it, but I feel like it gives you better resolution on modulation curves at slower rates doing it this way. So yeah, that's using LFO Tool in Bitwig. Thankfully, it's nowhere near as difficult to set up as it is in Cubase. It's a bit of a mystery to me why Bitwig doesn't have its own really highly customizable multi-stage envelope generator. I mean, you can take this to a whole other level. Like we could take this point Y, we could modulate that with say this one, turn that back on. Oh, there it is. Mic's in the way. Okay, so that's already being fed, I think, into the FM 3:2. Oh yeah, it's still really slow, that one. Bring that down, it's a bit too much. So yeah, you get the idea. There was something else I was going to show you with this. I can't remember what it was now. Oh right, yeah, that's right. So on this first one, if we give that a little wiggle, we could use this to modulate this a bit. I'm not sure why it's not giving me X. Maybe if I snap it and only go sideways it will. Huh. I'm sure you can modulate these side to side as well. I've done it before, I know I have. That's another thing I'm going to have to try and figure out. It seems like it only gives me the Y control down here when I drag this around, never the X, which is a bit odd. But still functional. So yeah, you can even modulate the points. I think you can maybe even modulate the you can modulate the curves as well. Let's try that on this one. Funky. So yeah, now our envelope's doing the funky chicken. Good stuff. So yeah, that's really it. Using LFO Tool in Bitwig is much more functional for what you need it to do than it ever was for me in Cubase. Just because you can use it to modulate just basically it's like an Etch-a-Sketch. It draws a perfect curve for you, and then you feed that into an audio rate modulator, which will then modulate whatever you assign it to in the exact shape of that curve. I think that's just genius. And then yeah, it's a lot easier to also then modulate the points of the LFO curve in Bitwig than it is in Cubase. Like, I'd have to draw a bunch of automation into Cubase to do that. I do need to figure out that XY thing. That's a bit odd. I guess you could. Oh, maybe it's the pulse width. Yeah, the pulse width does that. Don't really need to. So I could modulate that again with this one. And you can see it starts to glitch out a little bit as the crazier you get with it. So small amounts is fine. Excuse me. But yeah, that's LFO Tool in Bitwig. Obviously a massive improvement over setting it up to do stuff like that in Cubase. In Cubase I mostly just used it as a basic volume ducker because using it as a modulation source was just such a pain. And it's not like Bitwig either, where I could just save this. I could just take phase plant off of here and then call this instrument or synth, and then I've got all of those 3 different LFO tools set up. I could even add a separate modulator for this one. Let's just do that while I'm handling it. We'll do another audio rate mod. This one will set the input to that 3rd MSEG. Right there. LFO Tool out. And yeah, this one doesn't have I'd need to put another DC offset in there. and I'll probably put it in a chain again like the others too. So we got our offset, our LFO tool in that chain. It's already muted, it's already assigned, so this is now ready to assign to whatever we want. So we could go to, oh, I took faceplant out. The point of what I'm trying to show you here though is we can take this, it's already in this chain, so we can just save this as, say, preset to library and call it LFO Tool synth rec and save. And then anytime I want to load a synth and want to modulate it with LFO Tool, and I just love that you can do this in Bitwig, I can just go here and go presets and look for LFO. This is the one I think that I normally use. I've got 6 pre-mapped, and I think each one of them also has, yeah, I've got, I think these I do have set up for XY, yeah. I think this must be using an older version of LFO Tool though. I think in a recent update, I think they might have changed the X's to be a pulse width control. I'm not sure on that, but I did recently update it, I think, very recently. So, but yeah, that's all already preset, and then you can just assign modulators to whatever, and you've got macros that you can modulate with these guys here. So if for an example here, if I load up this LFO tool and we go back to the bank that I wrote for point mods, let's see if the X's work. Okay, yeah, these do still work. So there must still be a way to assign that, and the reason that's better is it just kind of snaps to the next one. So I could add this to here, and then when I hit play, it's going to modulate in the shape of the first LFO, which is actually, it's modulating itself right now, and that is just cool. So yeah, you can actually, that's something I've never even thought to try, but yeah, you can even modulate LFO Tool with itself in Bitwig. Alright, that's it for another one. I wanted to keep it a bit quicker than I did tonight really, but tomorrow night we'll actually make some noise. Tonight was mostly me talking about setting it up and just how clever the routing can be in Bitwig. If you can think of a way to route something, like those tricks I taught you about with feeding only one note as a modulation source, or only notes at 0 velocity to trigger an LFO, things like that. I need to dig into the how of those things. I'm sure it's really straightforward, but I'm not trying to figure it out in the middle of a live stream. So yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow evening, and hopefully have figured something else out, or we'll talk about just making some bass sounds or synthesis or different modulation, create some crazy chain with a synth with a bunch of nested third-party effects and go crazy modulating it or something. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.